going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again to give you guys another Kamen Rider Saber review. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 22, a really awesome episode that I'm really excited to break down for you guys, so let's get right into this. The Sword of Logos have a challenging time comprehending Tetsudo leaving the team, Rika going as far as to call him a traitor, with Ogami demanding an apology from her. Rika questions Ogami's loyalty for allowing Tetsudo even leave in the first place, but Ogami promises to retrieve Toma's sword in order to prove otherwise. This is something that I've really been enjoying about Ogami's character. While yeah, he is clearly still on the side of the Sword of Logos, I do like that he doesn't necessarily see Toma or Tetsudo in this case as the bad guys. This is something that we constantly see Rintaro and Ren himself definitely struggling with the entire time. Ren has no problems just seeing the world as black and white, simply seeing it as the Sword of Logos are the good guys, anyone who doesn't stand with the Sword of Logos are clearly the bad guys. So he has no issue seeing Toma as the villain, whereas Rintaro has fought with Toma for so long, so he doesn't quite see Toma as the bad guy, but he does see him fighting for the wrong side. Ogami doesn't really have that kind of perspective. He sees it as two people fighting for the same exact goal, but he sticks with the Sword of Logos for reasons that I'll get more into later on. Back at Toma's bookstore, we find out that the victim from the previous episode was actually a twin, both of which are famous for being champions of food eating competitions. I don't know the actual term for like a food eating competition, so whatever the actual term is, apparently they're very famous for it because they can eat a lot of food really fast, and I gotta say I'm actually super jealous because they're able to eat so much and yet still stay really skinny and beautiful. Like, that is something I wish I could do myself. We then get a pretty funny gag where Tetsudo is trying to examine Yuri the same way he would any other sword, and Yuri is trying to hide from Tetsudo before we cut back to Toma and Mei, who find out that the other twin has also been turned into the same monster. We then get a really sweet scene with Ogami where Ogami explains to his son why he and Toma no longer fight together. He tells his son that the reason he sticks with the Sword of Logos is because, as far as he knows, they have the much better chance of protecting the world than Toma ever will. And this is what I was bringing up about Ogami's character earlier. The reason he fights for the Sword of Logos is because he feels like that's the safest bet for saving the world and, you know, thus protecting his kid. His kid is really his end goal in the end. It's not that he doesn't care about anyone else, but of course, you know, as a father, his son is going to be his number one priority. So there is something very noble about him sticking with the Sword of Logos, despite the fact that he knows that morality wise, I'm sure he knows that Toma is definitely on the more morale side, I guess, of things. I'm not sure like how to better articulate that, but essentially he knows that Toma is definitely more morally correct than the Sword of Logos. It's just that the Sword of Logos essentially have the resources necessary to fully protect the world from what's coming. Ogami then goes after Toma, and Toma ends up facing the same issues he always seems to have when facing any of the other riders. He's continuously pulling his punches. Ogami knocks out Toma, but he doesn't take his sword, only Excalibur. I mean, the King of Arthur power-up, which is basically Excalibur. Ogami returns to the Sword of Logos with the power-up, but of course Rika is unimpressed with Ogami having only retrieved one power-up, which to that I say that's more than any of the other riders had actually retrieved. You even had Ren at one point trying to kill Toma while also trying to kill several other monsters, and even he wasn't able to retrieve anything from Toma. So, you know, take what you can get. If this doesn't prove Ogami's loyalty to you, you know, you're just a bad leader if that's the case. I mean, we as the audience already know that she's a bad leader, but you know, it's still pretty douchey. I mean, come on. The monster of the week is then detected, and of course Tetsudo is the first one to face it. The other riders arrive as well, and while Ogami and Rintaro are hesitant to attack the monster since obviously they don't want to harm the civilians trapped inside, Ren has absolutely no care as he attempts to take the monster down despite the casualties it'll inevitably cause. Yuri shows up on the scene to separate the monster from the civilians, but Storios also appears as well, and claims that because this monster is technically two of the same being, because, you know, the monster is basically taking over both twins instead of just one this time, he claims that the Sword of Light won't be enough to separate them. This leads to a scene where Rintaro briefly questions his own morality as he contemplates destroying the monster, knowing what the sacrifice would be. Luckily, before Rintaro can make the biggest mistake of his life, Toma shows up, and we see that his sword is capable of separating the civilians from the monster without the use of the Sword of Light. This was something that was hinted at in the previous episode, but somehow I didn't catch it. However, looking back at the previous episode, I do wish I brought that up last week. Toma, of course, separates the monster from the civilians, and then we get another really cool comic book looking scene with Yuri finishing the monster off. Highlight of the episode goes to a shot that really doesn't last that long, but it says so much for just like the brief seconds that we see it. We get a moment from Rintaro afterwards where he says nothing, but his silence says it all. Though nothing actually happened, Rintaro clearly feels a heavy wave of guilt over his willingness to actually destroy the monster, knowing what it would have cost. It was such a really well filmed moment, and he says nothing. However, you have Ogami right next to him, whom, you know, Ogami's always been kind of bitter towards Toma, not in a way of disliking Toma, but more in that kind of way that you get a lot of mentors, like mostly in the sense of you don't want to praise their achievements, but you want to critique their failures in order to make them better people, you know, as they continue to train. That's always what Ogami's kind of been with all the other writers. So when he gives you a compliment, you know it's like an actual meaningful compliment. So Rintaro's silence is followed by Ogami expressing how impressed he is by Toma's efforts as a Kamen writer, being amazed that he was able to separate the civilians from the monster when even Yuri, the Sword of Light, was unable to do so. Really well shot, and again, this is like a moment that lasts for like a few seconds, but it really had a huge emotional impact, at least for me specifically. Overall, this was a really awesome episode for sure. I definitely think that this episode blended the comedy and the serious tone perfectly. I really wish other episodes had this perfect balance that this episode had. I especially love the gag where Tetsudo kept trying to examine Yuri the same way he would any other sword, because despite Yuri being a person, he's also a sword. I also did love how we kind of see that Yuri learns the same way a child does. He, you know, uses quotes that Toma has used in the past, and then at the very end of the episode, he's using what we think at first is his own quotes, basically about, you know, protecting people and saving the world, but immediately Mia notices that he's just quoting lines from his comic book that he gets his power up from. Overall, guys, you know, I'm really liking the direction that the show's been going in. I'm really curious now that we get a little more from Ogami, because it really does feel like he is loyal to the sort of logos, but I do like that just because he's loyal to them, he's not against Toma. He still helps out Toma in the best ways he can, such as when he took Toma down. He did it because he had to fulfill a promise that he made in order to make sure that Rika knew he was still loyal to the sort of logos, and even after he took Toma down, he didn't take away any of Toma's swords or other power-ups, even though he easily could have. He simply took away the one that was most conveniently there for him. If he wanted to, he could have done so much more damage, but he definitely chose not to. And I also love the fact that, you know, despite the fact that Tetsudo left the Sword of Logos to join Toma, you know, he still refuses to speak ill about Tetsudo. In fact, in the previous episode, he showed nothing but support for him. We get a lot of scenes with Rintaro really questioning himself and his loyalty to the Sword of Logos, and I really hope we get a little bit more of that within the next few episodes. This is something that I feel like should have happened a little earlier on, but now that it's happening now, I'm just really happy to finally see it, honestly. Ren, I feel like, you know, again, nothing's really changing about his character. He's still hot-headed and just blindly listening to whatever Rika says to him. So honestly, like, I'm sure he'll eventually come around too at some point, but when he does, it won't be because he'll be questioning his own morality. It'll most likely just be because all the other writers have joined Toma and he doesn't want to feel left out. Or maybe the ghost of Kento, the guy that, you know, Ren for the longest time respected more than anyone, maybe Kento's ghost will appear and tell Ren, "You will join Toma, boo," or something like that. I don't know. With how weird Kamen Rider can get sometimes, I could see it going in a direction like that. But overall, guys, great episode. But at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know what you guys thought of the episode in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and if you guys want to support us in any other way, we do now have a Patreon, but definitely no pressure. But if you are able to send $1 a month our way, it would be very much appreciated. And if you were to do this, you can also check out my reviews of Kamen Rider Ryuki and Kamen Rider Dragonite, which I am for the most part keeping up with on a weekly basis, switching from one to the other week after week. But yeah, guys, above all though, don't forget to keep it A+.